Assad has fallen. The Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, the last of his family that has been ruling for 53 years in a lightning offensive by a number of radical groups in Syria, has fallen. He has fled the country, and according to some reports, he may have even been killed when a plane was shot down by the rebel groups leaving Damascus. That is, at this moment, unclear. Even though this thing has been happening at lightning speed, and so many things we don't know yet, I wanted to bring you up to date on what's going on, because there is a lot that we do know, and I wanted to tell you as much as we know at this point. So given that in mind, I wanted to get into some of the things that we have been told so far about what's happening. What we know for certain is that the rebels have defeated Bashar al-Assad. And listen, this starts back on, well, I mean, the war itself, to kind of put it in context, began in 2011 with a civil war that began. It was raging just, violently for a bunch of years. You had all kinds of folks pouring weapons into there. That was certainly if not an overt, a covert attempt by the United States to get regime change. We funded all these so-called moderate rebel groups, which of course we now know were nothing of the sort. What somebody wants to call a moderate today is a radical tomorrow, or in the eyes of other people is a radical anyway. But as I think I've told you a few times before, some of the groups that the Obama administration funded, one through the CIA, another through the Pentagon, end up turning on each other. The guns and all the weapons that we send to the area get out of anyone's control, and it just causes more and more mayhem, and we have no idea what was going on. We just wanted to overthrow Bashar al-Assad back then. And here's one of the big problems with that. You never know what's going to come next. And I don't know why people think that if you get rid of a leader you don't like, that somehow things are going to be better, even when you have no idea what's going to come next. And that's really the situation that we're in right now. And just real quick, this offensive started on the 27th of November, so just a week or so ago. And again, to put things in the near-term context, since about 2020, when Aleppo, after 4 years of fighting, was won by the Syrian regime with lots of help from Russia. You may remember there was all kinds of atrocities committed. A lot of civilians lost their lives in the bombing campaign that went on, et cetera. But then there was relative calm. And by all accounts, it looked like, Syria had weathered the storm, and they had relatively won. But that was a big relative, because even at that point, and actually let me toss this map up here and to kind of show you, this is what Syria looked like before 27 November. So you see in the upper right-hand corner of that purple area, that's where there's a lots of the Syrian Democratic Forces. That's where the most of the U.S. Little small bases are peppered through out there. You see the yellow area at the top. That's where Turkish forces have been involved. Then you see that gray area where it says Idlib in the upper left-hand corner. That's where the rebels and the opposition figures never lost control. The government of Syria never regained control over that. And then all the red area there in the main area was what the regime held. And then that light blue area there toward the center of the screen, that was kind of where, again, some of the U.S. forces were located as well. One other interesting thing to point out here that's going to come into play significantly here in the coming days is Tartus. You see on the far left-hand side on the Mediterranean Sea, that's where the Russian naval base is, their only warm water port that they had. And that is very much going to be the center of a lot of discussion about what's going to happen with that. As of this morning, the still acting prime minister of Syria, who decided to stay on when Assad left, to try and help transition into the new regime, as they're calling it. They said that that's going to be decided by the new regime. They said that we don't have anything to say about that. That's going to be up to Russia. And I assure you, Moscow is scrambling to try to figure out what that's going to mean. And that could have significant strategic implications for the Russians. I want to make something clear, though, that's important, is that, a lot of people hear, on the news all the time about HTS. We showed some comments from one of their leaders a couple of days ago about what he thinks they want to accomplish, which was the overthrow of the regime. That mission was accomplished. And then he said that basically we're a lot more moderate than we were. We're not like the Taliban. We're going to come in pluralistic and all that kind of stuff. That remains to be seen. But what's also important to understand is HTS is one of many groups involved in this big sweep south. For example, there was some other specific actors. There was the National Front of Liberation, Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish al-Izza, New al-Din al-Zinki movement, several Turkish formations, and then others have come under this umbrella that's roughly called the Syrian National Army, as opposed to the regime's Syrian Arab Army. So you see, there's a whole lot of groups here. Now, they just won a big victory here, and on the surface of it, it's like, yay, that's good for us, and we're now going to take over. But I mean, far from a monolithic group. If we look back at history as what happened in similar cases where people have common purpose and then they're working towards a common objective. Once that objective is accomplished, now all of a sudden you have a lot of different actors saying, okay, now here's what we're going to do. No, we're going to do this. No, we're actually going to go over this way. Here's what we're going to, you see what I'm saying? So this has every possibility to get a lot uglier. A lot of other things that are going to be happening right now, because although Assad has certainly left, and right now it's unclear. There was a reported that a plane was shot down. Actually, HTS itself claimed responsibility, said we did shoot down a plane that left. They think Assad was on it, but there's been no confirmation as of the time of this video. But that leaves a lot of people to have to figure out what's going to happen next in Syria. One of the big ones is this 200,000 member Syrian army. Now, I want to make a point about this army, first of all, and how this rapid destruction of Syria took place. Because at least what's been reported so far, and anything I've been able to see even before coming on this show right now, there were no pitched battles. There were no, like, you know, the Syrian opposition forces came down. They met them outside of the city of Homs, and there was a big fight and lots of tanks and, you know, whatever. And then all of a sudden they pushed through. There was none of that. So far, every time this force escalated and moved forward, the Syrian army moved backwards all the way through until finally in Damascus, they literally just start taking their uniforms off, a la what happened to the Iraqi security forces in June of 2014. So what that tells me is the most likely case, and I'm sure that time will tell, and they'll start and analyzing this. When you see an entire army that out of nowhere doesn't even put up a resistance, that implies strongly something what I observed in Afghanistan during my last combat deployment there, where many of the Taliban were making secret deals with members of the Afghan security forces. And there was some times where they said, hey, you don't shoot us in this area, we won't shoot you. We'll just go forward here, and then they'll work together. We intercepted some of their secret communication, so I know this for a fact. That's also a lot of what happened, much of what happened when the Taliban eventually swept into power in August of 2021, because they made a lot of deals with the Afghan security forces and said, hey, there's no reason for us to fight. Look, this war is over. We're going to roll up here. You just set your arms aside, move on, go home. That's all you need to worry about doing. And that's exactly what they did. And that's why the Afghan war collapsed so quickly. Something similar appears to have happened here. And again, I think we're going to find out that some deals were made probably with a number of Syrian army generals, other military leaders that, hey, you know, we'll give you safe passage. We'll take care of you. You can join the new regime, whatever. Some kind of version of that happened because no one fought that it appears. So I think that this was probably a conspiracy that had been building for a long time. And then when these guys launched this in late November, I think that there was already a deal in place, and that accounts for this literal deterioration and the disintegration of the Syrian army. But then the other aspect of this, though, is what's going to happen to those guys? What's going to happen to the foot soldiers, the ones who probably didn't make a deal, but now what's going to happen? Because now America has some experience with this when we, defeated Saddam Hussein, and then there's this large army that had been governing for, decades. All of a sudden, they're out of a job. Now, we disbanded them and outlawed the Ba'ath Party and all that. So suddenly, all these guys were out of a job. And then you had the Sunni Shia dynamics that came into basically fire and just started this another civil war within Iraq, which was the insurgency and all that. We certainly know how all that played out personally. But now then, what is the HTS, or this conglomeration of all these different groups? What are they going to do? Are they going to disband the Syrian army? Are they going to incorporate them? Are they going to offer them a job? That remains to be seen, because if you just get rid of them and make the huge mistake that the U.S. made, those guys are trained, they have weapons, and they want to eat. And if you don't give them a path to a safe transition, then they're going to do what anyone is going to do, and they're going to form an insurgency, and they're going to defend their families. I mean, that's just how it works. And they're going to band together because it's the only thing they know. So that's going to be one of the next big things to watch, because, folks, there is so much possibility for this to turn into a huge bloodbath. The civil war that was raging in its early stages, and how bad that was for the country, that could all be repeated and exceeded, depending on how the various players play it, how this conglomeration, how effective are they at keeping themselves together and having common purpose in political realm, besides just the military realm. And what do they do with all these people, these Syrian military folks? Then there's the Syrian people themselves. Lots of people, even in Damascus, were significantly harmed by this Bashar al-Assad regime. And there's a lot of bitterness. Lots of people were killed. Lots were imprisoned, etc. They're going to want retribution. Bashar al-Assad himself is gone, but there's a whole lot of officials there who carried out these orders and these edicts, and people are going to want revenge. And so I assure you that's going to be an issue here. And we've already heard a lot of reports, coming just as the sun came up today, of looting and all kinds of thievery, just like we saw in Baghdad when Saddam Hussein was deposed. You had all kinds of people just looting everything. I'm sure that's going to happen too, because the economy, as you may recall, was in absolute shambles. And a lot of them, even the military, they didn't have enough to eat. It was a lot of trouble with that. There's also lots of external players as well. And let me just put this map back up here again, and you can see, Turkey was initially openly supportive of this movement, these opposition figures moving down south. But then they also said, well, but we don't want instability, so we're not really sure. But now then they have an opportunity to possibly take more action against the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is going to put them in the crosshairs of the United States, because the U.S. is supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces, has for a long time. Are we going to turn our backs on them now and just say, well, hey, you guys are on your own? Or are we going to turn and push pressure against our NATO ally Turkey if they start going into there? You see, this could put us in a lot of trouble. Now, I'll just tell you flat out, the first thing the United States needs to do is get every one of our troops out of there right now. Trump tried to get this done when he was president in 2020. And he allowed himself to be talked out of it by some of the people that were in the Pentagon and in the State Department, Department of Defense, et cetera. Lots of voices were pushing against that, because they claimed this ridiculous claim that somehow there's benefit to the Americans. There never was. All it was is gotten some of our troops killed, a lot of them wounded over the time, and has produced absolutely nothing of value. And that's on top of the physical cost of maintaining these things in a foreign country where all you can do is airlift in supplies every day. So that's the first thing that needs to happen for the United States. We need to get rid of this strategic vulnerability that we've been fostering like a festering wound, an ulcer for all these years that we've been having in there since Obama first put them in there. We need to get them out of there. So that's the first point. Then we need to do everything we can diplomatically to work with Turkey and the Syrian Democratic Forces to come to some kind of an accommodation, so that there doesn't turn into a big pogrom there, because that's also not in our interest. But it's not in our military interest. Trump said, actually, I think it was about 36 hours ago or so, he said, this is a bad situation, but it's not our deal. This is not anything that affects American national interest, and they're going to have to figure this out. And I expect that he'll probably do that. The question is, what is the current administration going to do in between now and then? Hopefully they won't do anything that's going to cause any problems and exacerbate this situation. But because they're still in charge, they need to get our troops out of there. In the South, we also have some issues with Israel. Now, Israel, interestingly, about I guess it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, was seen having built some new fortifications south of I think it's called the Alpha Line, where the separation between Syria and Israel. And it was unexplained. No one was explaining why you're suddenly building what appeared to be, anyway, some kind of fortifications along the border, almost as though you thought there might be a possibility that someone from Syria would be moving south, which didn't really make sense at the time because the Syrian army was, I mean, we knew it was bad before. We didn't know it was this bad, but it certainly wasn't going to launch off into anything against Israel. And one wonders, because we know for certain that Israel over time has been providing assistance, weapons and everything else to a lot of these rebel groups against Assad. So one wonders if they didn't have some advanced knowledge of this. And by the way, just this morning, Israel has announced that they have, Netanyahu specifically announced that they are moving some troops forward of the line. And now then they say, in this buffer zone, that we're going to retake the buffer zone and reoccupy it because we want our place to be secure. Again, looks like they were they may had some advanced notice of this. With the Mossad and the Shin Bet and all their intelligence agencies, I doubt that they were caught unaware of this. We just don't know to what extent they may have been directly involved, or may have been some kind of a deal that they were going to do this. That, who knows, they may have even helped them. These things always take time to come out. We're not sure about that right now. All we are sure is right now is that there's lots of fear in Syria. There were already lots of troubles with the functioning of the government and just getting food to people. There was, the economy was literally just wrecked. So now then there's going to be, this period where, and I was actually on an X space last night where there's some people from Damascus that were on the phone that were talking about what was happening there. And some of them, of course, initially were euphoric. You've probably seen lots of these images already of like Bashar al-Assad and Hafez al-Assad, his father, their monuments being ripped down all over the country. And I'm sure there's lots of people that, just like when Saddam Hussein fell, were really happy at first, but everything depends on what happens next. And that's one thing that we're all going to be watching for. We hope and we pray for the people of Syria, those who are always the victims of these things, just the regular people, whether it's the regime, whether it's these opposition forces, whatever, they're always the pawns in the middle, just like the people in Lebanon, in Beirut, et cetera. Even the civilians in Israel that were the victims of the 10/7 attack by Hamas. All these political entities and militant formations, they always fire back and forth, and it's just the regular people who are always the bill payers. And our prayers are with them this morning. We hope that this will break from the tradition of things that happen in the Middle East a lot, and that somehow these groups will form some kind of coherent government, that there won't be this widespread retribution and large killing, and that it won't devolve back into an even worse civil war than the one that started back in 2011. But we will stay on top of this for you here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We're always tracking this stuff for you, and we'll continue to do so. Thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next episode, Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Hi, everybody. Today is Sunday, December 8th, and Professor Morandi is back with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Nima.
Professor, let's get started with what's going on right now in Syria. People are shocked with what happened in Syria. What's your take on, we had a meeting between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. What has happened in that meeting, and how do you put the pieces together when it comes to Syria right now?
Well, I can't comment about the details of that meeting because I don't have any information in that regard. It's just hearsay, so I don't want to say something that I'm not certain about. What I can say is, and this is something that I've been saying for a long time, is that, and I think many others agree, that Syria has always been the weakest link. And I've always been concerned that this may happen to Syria at some point. Of course, so swiftly was a surprise, but the United States has crushed Syria, basically, the Europeans and the Americans. They've destroyed the economy. They're stealing the oil and the agricultural products that are, the heartland is in northeastern Syria, where the Americans have occupied that area with its proxies. And they've imposed extraordinary sanctions on the people. So people are living in misery, and life is very tough. And you have Americans occupying the northeast, but also occupying the southeast. Then you have the Israelis constantly bombing Syria, both through the Mediterranean, through Jordan, and through the occupied Golan, regularly bombing Syria. Then you have these terrorists in Idlib constantly causing trouble for a government that has no money. Then, of course, Hezbollah was focused on the war in Syria. Iran was focused on in Lebanon, on the border with Palestine, and Iran was focused there as well. And so a very difficult situation became catastrophic because no one expected Mr. Erdogan to suddenly, I think, no one expected him to suddenly strike this way. And you know, there are a number of things that I should point out, and that is that people are much more politically aware nowadays, and they recognize that what the dirty war in Syria was all about. And there's no justification for what Erdogan did. The hundreds of thousands of Syrians that have died since 2011, Erdogan bears more responsibility than any other person on this planet. He carried out this operation, an operation led by the United States, and the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. In fact, I don't remember if it's in 2012 or 13, but a young reporter, Suri Nashim, your viewers could look her up. She was reporting on the Turkish border with Syria and near Ain al-Arab, or Kobani, as it's also called. And she was reporting for Press TV. And this is all, I think, well, YouTube removed Press TV, but I guess it can be found. She was saying that she was saying that ISIS is being supported through World Food Organization trucks. They're putting weapons inside them and sending them inside Syria, and troops for ISIS. And then Turkish intelligence said she was a spy. She went on television, live television, saying that they called me a spy, but that's not true. I'm very worried. And hours later, she died in an accident. And there was never an investigation, but we all believe that she was murdered by Turkish intelligence for revealing the truth. And she was Lebanese American with 2 kids. And the US Embassy carried out no real investigation. And so now there's an award in her name, a journalist award, that is given out every year. But Turkey, of course, I shouldn't say Turkey. Turks are very good people, very supportive of Palestine. But Erdogan, he supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We know about Jake Sullivan's email to Hillary Clinton about Al-Qaeda being on their side. We know all these, so your audience is politically aware. But for those who support President Erdogan, the question is, if President Assad is so bad, and I think Erdogan is much worse because he bears primary responsibility. But if he's so bad, then why did President Erdogan want to have rapprochement with him? And why did he try to improve relations? Why? If he's so principled, then why did he do that? And then why did he suddenly turn against him again? The reason why former President Assad did not accept Erdogan was because he wanted to stay inside Syria and negotiate, and that would have legitimized occupation. No leader would accept that. In any case, the misery that we see in Syria today was because of the sanctions, it was because of the dirty war. Syria, which was a prosperous country in 2011, is a country that is broken. And today we've seen scenes that are similar to when the Americans occupied Baghdad. All of the government buildings are being, all their assets are being stolen. Everything is being taken away. There's no security. There's no government. The only difference is that Iraq has oil and Syria is under American occupation. And the Americans are not going to remove the sanctions. They'll provide conditions, and conditions that they will not be able to meet, as we've experienced in Iran. Why would the Americans remove sanctions? Have they removed sanctions in Cuba? And by the way, this is what they're doing in Cuba too. They're creating massive dissatisfaction through, crushing sanctions, and Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and elsewhere. So the tools of sanctions are something that the Americans are using to crush a people and then take over. But in any case, and sorry, I didn't answer your question, I'm just speaking. The important point here is that I don't think this is going to end well for Turkey. It's not going to end well for anyone. Al-Qaeda is not an organization that is controllable. Even if Jolani, who was a member of ISIS, who is a member of Al-Qaeda, even when they broke away from Al-Qaeda, it was a show. In fact, when he announced his separation from Al-Qaeda, they invited senior members of Al-Qaeda there to sit with him, and he announced the separation. It was just a show for PR, for improving relations with the West, and Al-Qaeda officials were sitting there agreeing with his separation. All this is online. This is available for people to see. So it was a dirty war, and this is the result. This may be good for Erdogan, personally, but it's not going to be good for Turkey. It's not going to be good for anyone. And perhaps it'll be good for Netanyahu. But this, these terrorists, they could create unrest now that they're gloating in their victory. It could create unrest in Saudi Arabia. It could create unrest across the region. It could create unrest in Central Asia. They have thousands of terrorists from Central Asia. I think the Americans, of course, would be happy for these terrorists to go and destabilize Central Asia and China. 3,000 to 5,000 Chinese terrorists, and many from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and elsewhere in Central Asia, some from Afghanistan, some from Iran, and many from Turkey and elsewhere. These are people who are now drunk in their victory, and they will be very dangerous in the future for global security and stability. And this may not end well. Turkey is a country which can be impacted by extremism, and so can others. So I don't expect this to end well for anyone. And Iran, as the foreign minister said yesterday, Iran has always said, Iran supports the opposition, but not Al-Qaeda and ISIS and these crazy extremists who cut off people's heads and slaughter. And they're not people who can be reformed. Would you trust anyone who, in the past, would carry out these sort of killings? Of course not. So the legitimate opposition is something that everyone supports outside of Syria, or at least Iran always did. The Syrian government, though, of course, definitely was not an ideal government, but overthrowing it was not in the interest of the people of Syria. They did to Syria what they did to Libya. Gaddafi, was he an ideal leader? Definitely not. But of course, no worse than Western leaders. Look at what they did to Gaza and so on, or with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Or Saddam Hussein, which we Iranians despise, but we never accepted the legitimacy of the US invasion of Iraq, because the West has no legitimate right to overthrow governments. So Syria is much worse off today due to Erdogan, due to NATO, due to oil-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf that have been, and gas-rich dictatorships that have been supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other such groups. So Syria is much worse off. The region will be worse off. Who is going to fix Syria? Who's going to pay for all of this? Especially with all the looting that we've been seeing in the last few hours, and the terror and the fear that we now see. Who is going to fix the country? And now that Mr. Erdogan's Al-Qaeda allies have reached the border, have reached the Golan, the occupied Golan, are they going to liberate Palestine now? Are they going to move forward and save the people of Gaza? Is Mr. Erdogan going to stop sending oil to Netanyahu? The hypocrisy is stunning. This is a major setback for the resistance. This is huge. This is very bad. But I have a feeling that this will not end well for those who are opposed to the resistance, because these extremists have the potential to disrupt countries in the Persian Gulf region, Jordan, or in countries in North Africa, and even cause trouble for Turkey. It will be at least an economic burden, if not much more than that. They're more dangerous for them than they are for Iran. Of course, they're dangerous for parts of Lebanon and Western Iraq. They could destabilize Iraq, which is a major oil producer. There are many dangers lying ahead for the region and the world as a result of what the Americans and the Europeans and Erdogan have done. And this is not in the interest of the West. It's only they're only doing this for the sake of the Israeli regime. This is all about Israel. Just as Iraq was about Israel, just as Libya was about Israel. This is all Western policy in this region is designed to help Israel, even if the West makes the sacrifices. Remember, the dirty war in Syria led to millions of Syrian refugees, desperate refugees going to Europe. It changed the map of Europe, the political map of Europe. Brexit in the UK was, to a large degree, as a result of the refugees inflow into Europe. I remember some of these politicians, they would go around with posters, big posters or billboards with refugees coming to Europe, trying to spread fear in the UK, and they won Brexit. So yes, this is not going to end well for anyone, but we'll have to wait and see.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal here with Aaron Mate, as always. On the Lebanon ceasefire, I addressed this on Jimmy Dore, on Judge Napolitano, and we put it out on our podcast that we stream on Spotify and everywhere else. But the key issue there is that once Israel was able to compel Hezbollah to de-link its involvement in the conflict from Gaza, so that its condition for ending its involvement was not contingent on a ceasefire in Gaza, then Netanyahu was able to do a ceasefire. And that's the way Netanyahu has always actually sought quick deals to stay out of conflicts. But because of the nature of his governing coalition with such extreme figures as Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who have designs on Gaza and settling northern Gaza, Netanyahu is more reluctant to end the Gaza conflict because his coalition would collapse. So he was able to do a ceasefire deal in Lebanon with U.S. pressure. The Israeli-born Amos Hochstein was pushing the Lebanese government, and specifically Parliamentary Speaker Nabi Berri, who is the liaison to Hezbollah, to effectively allow Israel to continue operating in southern Lebanon after a ceasefire deal. So it's not really a ceasefire. And now, since the ceasefire deal has been inked, in just like a week, UNIFIL, the United Nations peacekeeping force in southern Lebanon, has recorded, even CNN's reporting it, approximately 100 ceasefire violations by Israel. These violations are serious. UNIFIL records like the most ticky-tack violations by the Lebanese side. It could be like shepherds moving their flock. But what Israel's doing is shelling civilian areas with tanks, attacking people, abducting people, and bombing. So they're continuing to operate. Lebanon's sovereignty has been completely violated. The 2006 UN ceasefire deal has been abrogated, and Hezbollah has been actually forced to strike back, but waited for UNIFIL to make this declaration before they did so, which was very tactical. So I think this will collapse pretty soon. What are your thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, everything is premised on Israel insisting on its right to deny the self-determination of the Palestinian people. I mean, that's why there's a conflict to begin with. That's why Hezbollah is involved to begin with. That's why there is an axis of resistance. It's because there are people in the region who want to support Palestine's right to exist and the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, which Israel is devoted to crushing. And so any agreement that is premised on that, in which Israel retains the right to deny Palestinians their freedom and continue to carry out violence, it will ensure future conflict, because eventually, even if Hezbollah adheres strictly to the terms of any ceasefire agreement with Israel, Israel will always be looking for an excuse to provoke more violence, which it then uses to deepen its occupation of Palestinians. Now its main goal is to basically take over more parts of the West Bank that it wants, if not full-blown annexation. And if it does that, there will always be resistance and there will always be conflict. And it's a given. If you look at Israel's history, they always, even when they accept ceasefire agreements, they break them when they want to. I mean, look how many times they've broken ceasefires with Hamas in Gaza, including on the day when Barack Obama was elected in 2008, which was a really historical event. The first Black president defeating, after 8 years of George W. Bush defeating the Republicans. And Israel took advantage of that and broke a ceasefire that was holding with Hamas and launched a massacre that continued up until Obama's inauguration. So, it was easy to predict that Israel would continue to violate an agreement that's called a ceasefire, especially when it had, as you talked about, Amos Hochstein acting as its lawyer under the guise of being a broker.
And Donald Trump coming into power with his MEGA, or Make Israel Great Again administration, which will now feature Charles Kushner, longtime patron of Benjamin Netanyahu and father of Jared Kushner, as ambassador to France.
You've been saying, MEGA in jest, but Donald Trump actually recently said it out loud. I don't know where this was, but this was him speaking recently. Here he is.
Again, and we're going to make America great again. We're going to make them both great again, greater than ever before.
So there it is. MEGA is not just a term that can be used just to mock, MAGA. It's literally Donald Trump's credo as well. I mean, he's open about it. And that's what $100 million from Marian Adelson, along with other anti-Palestinian donors, will buy you.
He's also appointed the father of Tiffany Trump's husband, his daughter's husband, from the Boulos family in Lebanon, as a kind of Middle East peace envoy. This is a figure who ran for a parliamentary seat once in Lebanon. So I think the preponderance of power in the Trump administration is firmly on the side of Miriam Adelson. In southern Lebanon, meanwhile, residents are, Reuters is reporting that Israeli tanks are on the ground and residents are unable to return to their homes. Israel is basically blocking a triumphant return for the heavily Shia population of the South. And this flowed directly into the Salafi jihadi assault on Aleppo. It provided the perfect opportunity. This was a nice find by Partisan Girl, Mariam Sousli, who notes that Syrian insurgent leader in Turkey, who thinks al-Qaeda will give him power, says the Hezbollah ceasefire in Lebanon was their cue to invade Syria, as it provided him with a fig leaf. He goes on to say they took advantage of the fact Israel had weakened Hezbollah, Iran, and Syria, and decided to attack, even if it means damaging Gaza during the genocide. This is why the ceasefire that did not hold was a mistake. This is her argument. It gave Israel's allies in the region an excuse to claim the Axis abandoned Palestine. It's time for the Axis to recognize this is the existential war, and there's no way out but through. And she argues that Russia must also recognize how intertwined Syria's fate is with Lebanon and Palestine. Israel's their problem too. Russia has the naval base at Tartus and the Hmeimim air base. Tartus is extremely important for Russia and its power projection. as is Syria, its only true ally in the Arab League. Syrian opposition leader says Lebanon truce open door to Aleppo assault. I mean, it was completely obvious almost the day after the ceasefire, that this quote unquote rebel offensive began. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, and some people might say, well, if this really was related, then why didn't Al-Qaeda, aka HTS, launch this offensive, while the fighting was going on? And I don't know, this is just guessing, but I think the answer there is that that'd be just too obvious, right? If you're Al-Qaeda and you're attacking the Syrian government, Hezbollah and their allies, while Israel is carpet bombing Lebanon during, declared hostilities, I think it's too obvious. So why not wait until after Hezbollah has been battered to do exactly what you've always wanted to do? And everyone says that that Al-Qaeda has taken advantage of Israel's conflict with Hezbollah, and not to mention, but not just the recent flare-up, but years of Israeli bombings of Syria. Israel's bombed Syria hundreds of times.
Yeah.
On top of the fact that you have sanctions on Syria that have made, have crushed the economy and have left Syria with very little resources and have devalued the value of its currency so that it's hard to pay your own fighters. Everything contributes to the climate in which Al-Qaeda, and that's what they are. They've changed their name many times, but they're still Al-Qaeda. They're led by the founding leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria. It's also the former deputy to the founding caliph of ISIS. That's what led them to take advantage of the situation. And I think just doing it while the fighting was ongoing in Lebanon would have just been a little bit too obvious.
Yeah. But, Hezbollah fighters who might have held off the advance around Aleppo were fighting in Lebanon.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, December 6, 2024, the end of the day, the end of the week. It's our favorite roundtable with my dear friends, Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson. Gentlemen, thank you. Welcome here. Always a pleasure. There are a lot of events that happened this week, and I want to pick your brains on all of them. Ray, to you first. It seems the neocons are at it again, this time in Syria. Before you address what they're up to, why do we have 1,000 troops in Syria when the government of Syria asked us to go?
You want a very cynical explanation?
Yes, I want a McGovern explanation.
There are people in Washington strong enough to prevail upon the military to leave the troops there. There are 900 to 1,000 troops. They are extremely vulnerable. Now, the ones across the border in Iraq have been shot at and have been damaged and wounded. That is the U.S. troops. So why are they leaving these troops up there in Syria? Well, a considered decision was made to, leave them up there and let's see if we can let's see if some of them get killed, and that will be a pretext for us to do real damage to whoever killed them, okay? There's no sense there except that they are helping to protect the extraction of the oil that we are stealing there, that Trump bragged about stealing. And actually some of that oil goes to Israel. So there is some utility to having those people up there, but the vulnerabilities far outweigh the benefits of keeping troops in Syria. Besides, they're not invited, huh? Okay, at least the Iraqis have asked us to leave, but they say, okay, you can stay a little longer. All right, you can stay a little longer. The Syrians never invited us. On the contrary, they have invited the Russians. So that should say something with respect to international law.
Larry, before we get into what the neocons are up to, didn't Trump in his first presidency order the military to get the heck out of Syria? And if he did, what happened?
He did. They ignored the order. They didn't carry it out. Look, the presence of U.S. troops in Syria is not just to protect the oil. It's also part of a longer range plan that actually started back well, it predated 2011, but it started under Barack Obama in earnest to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad because they saw Assad as a supporter of Iran, and this is an indirect way to attack Iran, weaken Iran, prevent any supplies from transiting Syria that would wind up in the hands of Hezbollah. The real irony here is that the United States, in providing this support, which it was collecting weapons in Benghazi, it was throughout all of Libya, the weapons in Libya were then brought to Benghazi. They were shipped from Benghazi to Turkey, were given to the Turks. The Turks then distributed them to the radical Sunni Islamists who are, let's call them, the theological descendants of Al-Qaeda. The terrorists that attacked us on 9/11 begat, this will sound like something out of Genesis. Al-Qaeda begat ISIS. ISIS begat Al-Nusra. Al-Nusra begat Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is right now carrying out that the military operation. They are receiving from the United States indirectly training, intelligence, and weapons. And those weapons now are being used against the Shia and the Alawites and the Christians in Syria. So the United States now, think about this, wrap your brain around it. The United States is supplying weapons and lethal aid to the very terrorists that attacked us on 9/11, okay? That's how far we've fallen, and we're using our military to attack the Shia elements, the Alawite elements, the Syrian army that's trying to defeat those terrorists. You'd think we'd be lined up with Bashar al-Assad, but no. We're more concerned about Iran, who hasn't carried out a single major terrorist attack against the United States in the entire first quarter of this 21st century. Instead, we're providing weapons and aid to the very terrorists who have been attacking the West because they want to establish a global caliphate.
Ray, you have a great piece at antiwar.com. I think it came out yesterday. The neocons are up to it again. What is their possible justification for what Larry just described?
They've been doing it, as Larry said, before 2011, when the spring broke out in Damascus. We have been kind of letting ourselves be used as a tool of Israel. Now, Bashar al-Assad, not the nicest person in the world, but he is absolutely no threat to the United States. Okay, who is he a threat to? Well, I mean, just like Saddam Hussein seemed to be a threat to Israel, so with Bashar al-Assad. So what do? Well, we trained these rebels, moderate rebels, mind you. We showed that little clip of Lloyd Austin saying, well, we spent $500 million, but we got 4 or 5 good ones that's still in the fight. Okay, that's how we distributed our largesse. And why? To keep chaos going in Syria, to deprive the ability of other people to supply Hezbollah in Lebanon, and most of all, to make that area not a threat to Israel. I want to quote, there was a New York Times bureau chief in Jerusalem, Jody Ruderin. At the height of this first breakout in 2013, she went to senior Israeli officials, which she knew quite well. She says, now tell me, what's the preferred outcome of this internecine, or this Sunni Shia fighting here in Syria? Well, what's Israel's preferred outcome? And they said, well, Jody, it's not it doesn't sound very good, but our preferred outcome is no outcome. As long as Sunni and Shia are at each other's throats, as long as they're hemorrhaging their capabilities here, Israel has nothing to fear from Syria. That's the name of the game as far as Israel is concerned. And it's impossible to look at U.S. policy toward Syria without thinking that we're joined at the hip as Israel. We're doing Israel's bidding by arming these moderate rebels, even if we're going to get 4 or 5 for the $500 million we invested in that particular tranche.
Larry, can we expect any change in American policy in Syria under Donald Trump, or will it be more of the same, notwithstanding Trump's campaign promises?
No, I don't think there'll be much of a change, unless Trump wakes up. But unfortunately, he's surrounded himself with people like Waltz and this clown Sebastian Gorka and Marco Rubio. They're not going to do. They see this as Ray pointed out. This is doing Israel's bidding, and remember, Israel is actually it wants to quote destroy Hezbollah. It doesn't want to do a thing about HTS. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that group, even though that group is listed as one of the top 10 terrorist groups attacking international targets over the last 10 years. That's who we're supporting. Yeah, and we said, well, we're not supporting them directly. Oh, no. We give it to Turkey. We give it to Ukraine. And then we use them as a cutout. That way we go, oh, gee, we don't know anything about this. No, we're absolutely up to our eyeballs in this. And now we've seen that it is expanding with the reemergence of the white helmets. These guys are a British intelligence outfit. They're a front group. And they're out there to spread misinformation, to create false flags. They tried it, 11 years ago to pretend that the Syrian army had launched a chemical weapons attack when in fact it was al-Nusra. It was the Western-backed terrorists that were launching it in order to try to create an incident that would justify further Western intervention. But this has a broader play beyond just Syria, Israel, and Turkey. This is also designed in part because the West genuinely believes that Russia, by providing military support to Syria, it will weaken its effort in Ukraine. I think they're mistaken in that, but that's part of this plan as well.
Let me introduce my guest, amazing educator and activist. Thank you for joining us once again, Dr. Sabrina. It's great to have you join us on RBN. Once again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Nick. It's so lovely to be back. I really enjoyed our last conversation, so I was excited for this.
Yeah, and there's been so many updates, especially in the Middle East with the genocide in Israel. There's so much to talk about. And after our first conversation, I definitely had to bring you back on, so I'm glad that you was able to make time. And the first thing I want to ask you about, doing a hard pivot, Zionists are melting down once again, as always, because Amnesty International, it took them 14 months. It took them 14 whole months to finally state that there is a genocide in Gaza. And I want to get your take about what's going on in this full-fledged rebellion by the Zionist state against international law. And it's always interesting to me when they accuse people who unapologetically support the Palestinian cause of being terrorist supporters, as we have senators openly declaring that they want to invade, murder. What's the implication? They want to murder people in the international court for holding Israel accountable. So there's a lot to discuss. I want to get your initial thoughts about Amnesty International and your general thoughts about what's going on in Gaza right now. Thank you for joining me once again, Dr. Sabrina.
Of course, thank you. Well, I just want to, since we're talking about amnesty, which is all about humanitarian law, right, and humanitarianism, and I was very interested in the topic that you were covering before. I just wanted to add to the topic from before.
If you want, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, it's so interesting when humanity and humanitarianism is evoked when it comes to the killing of a white man. Now, all of a sudden, where you see, the most common kind of like comments that I'm seeing all over social media are, he was a human being. He was a person. Where's our humanity, right? Like, we're supposed to, have our humanity evoked for this one white man who was technically a killer of so many people through his policies, right? And this is an example of white collar crime. right? This is what happens. We focus so much on blue collar criminals, people who are from the lower socioeconomic statuses, that when it comes to white collar criminals, when it comes to like CEOs and top notch, like C-suite leaders, then all of a sudden it's not criminality, right? So we have seen the dehumanization of hundreds of thousands of Muslims, Palestinians, Arabs, and absolutely anyone who stands with Palestinians or against genocide. So there's been this mass dehumanization happening, yet for the last 24 hours, there's been this like humanization propaganda where
That's such a great point. That's such a great point. I'm glad you brought it up, because we were talking about this yesterday. You notice that they still have a 24-hour manhunt for this guy who murdered the CEO. Meanwhile, there are women, and I know a personal friend, so this is like very close to my heart, who women report being raped, police off, whatever. We can't find nothing we can do about it. No, we can do about it. Oh, you assault, oh no, we can do about it. Police don't solve crimes. Meanwhile, they got a full-fledged manhunt for this guy, because they doing news reports. It's 24 hours. They're like, oh, we're trying our best to find this guy. We're looking at all these security footage. You notice how much they are and how obsessed they are bringing justice for this guy. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu can give a speech at Congress, and he's an indicted war criminal.
So, Nick, I actually watched this really excellent documentary on Netflix the other day, and I was going to share it on my social media anyway, but I'll tell you about it. It's called Power. I don't know if you've seen it already, and it basically deconstructs and digs deep into this, the police force and the origins of the police, like going back to slave mobs, and so the point of that show, or the point of me sharing, this documentary, is this idea that the police, we've been told that the police exist for the safety of the community, but really it only serves the interests of the corporate elite, the rich, the property owners, the white people, the upper crust of society, and the main thing is the people who hold power. Right. So we know, and I can tell you, this already, that, power asserts itself in many different ways. There are Black and brown people who assert power or have proximity to power, which gives them privilege, who then, oppress their own people. So, power gets utilized in many different ways, not just by white people, but those who have a proximity to it. And this is a great example of how that power served the interest of this elite white CEO, where all these resources were like poured into. So it's either to protect the white man or it's to oppress the Black and brown people, as we've seen with college campuses and protesters, who are anti-genocide, where the police are unleashed on them in violent ways. So, I mean, this documentary is really, really good. And even though, of course, one of the reasons why I love the documentary so much, and I keep saying this to people, is that, we really need to go back to this grounded, solidarity approach, where we realize that all oppressions are linked together, right? So the Black struggle for freedom and the oppression of Black people in America and other parts of the world, Western world, are linked to the struggle for freedom for Palestinians and those who are anti-genocide.
That's very well said. And that's why it's always hilarious when I see the Zionist ops always try to drive a wedge between Black Americans and Palestinians. I see it all the time. There's always those anime profiles, dog profiles, the Zionist bots. They will reply to my tweets like, "Don't you know that if you was in Gaza, they will call you the N-word?" I'm like, I've never seen any group of people unequivocally that show more solidarity with the Black cause than Palestinians and their supporters. Period. I have done reporting on the ground, and I posted an interview I did with one of the Kansas City Free Gaza organization. They explained we support reparations. We support all the ass of the Black radical movement. They've been the one who showed the most solidarity with us. Meanwhile, there's a viral video. I didn't want to show it on YouTube. There's a viral video of some settler colonialists. He's spitting in the face of this black kid as he calls him the N-word. And I just saw that on my timeline today. The contrast is so so poignant. And something else that you said that's important. Go ahead if you want to chime in. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, it's so interesting because this concept of identity politics, right, where someone's identity, like racialized identity, is almost like kind of put to the forefront to explain things or to promote things. And you'd think that identity politics would work in the favor of racialized people, right, where we are, where our identity, this like collective solidarity would come from that identity politics. The truth is it works against us, right? And we saw that with Kamala Harris. And I was going to say, it's so funny. Colonizers have always done this, separating of communities and divide and rule and conquer type of, that's been their goal. And we've seen it time and again, even in the last year and a half. And I was going to say to you, it's so funny. There have been 3 times on my social media. I'm quite active. I'm quite vocal on most topics, most kind of like political topics, but 3 times where I've been attacked. And it's interesting because it's all intercultural, intercommunity stuff, right? So one of the times I was attacked was when I didn't support Kamala Harris. So it was like this attack. And the same thing happened with you. I know it happened with you because I saw the comments that you would get, right?
I'm a sexist misogynist. Don't you know, Dr. Sabrina? I'm surprised you joined me because according to Kamala supporters, I'm the most vicious sexist there is, even though I voted for the Jewish woman.
And they weaponized this term misogynoir, right? Like all of a sudden it became like the most popular term over a few months where, it's a real problem, but the way that it was used and weaponized, disgusting. The other time that I was attacked viciously was when I talked about white feminism. And it was around the time where that young girl or that lady in Iran, that she was filmed in her underwear, walking around. And of course, the white feminists and, they just kind of like use that as a moment to be like, oh my God, look at this oppressive, backward regime. And look at this brave woman. It turned out that she had mental health issues. Her own family came out. Her husband, her parents had come out and requested for the picture not to be shared, and the video not to be shared, but it was completely weaponized. Now, I don't like to talk on behalf of communities. Like I remember when, George Floyd had been killed and like the Black Lives Matter movement was happening. One of the key things I have learned from my advocacy is to never talk over the people who are being impacted in that moment. Don't talk over Black people when it's, the Black struggle is the topic at the time. Don't talk over Iranians. Don't talk over Syrians, right? So I try my best not to speak on behalf of a community that I'm not a part of, that I'm not, on the receiving end of the whatever they're going through, right? However, it was very important at the time for me to comment on white feminism and the dangers of it and how it's used by imperial powers to kind of push this agenda. And the agenda is that this is a barbaric nation. We need to free these oppressed women, right? So that was the thing. And oh my man, I was viciously attacked by people who were pro-Palestine, who were like, and they'd always say that to me. They'd be like, so much for me supporting Palestine. I'm not going to do that anymore. All of a sudden, they weren't interested in Palestine because I made a comment about white feminism. So these white women were offended, and and Iranians were offended, right? The obviously the Shah Iranians. And now recently I've shared a few videos. I've actually not made any public comments of my own, but I've shared videos to dispel myths about what's happening in Syria. And my main goal, like you, Nick, I've seen, is to remind people that the same mainstream media that's been pushing an agenda, like how can you support that, the narrative of that mainstream media when it comes to this topic, right? Like be wary, be aware, ask questions, question what's happening, right? Like if we know that Zionists are liars, you know, the US has a stake in what's happening in the Middle East, then you know, be a bit critical in your thinking. And that has caused a crazy amount of backlash, right? You get called a pro-Assadist, someone who's denying the atrocities. So the point I'm making with all of this is this has happened, you know, historically in every movement, but this kind of interculture, intercommunal, interracial, intra-racial tension, it's designed to be that
Yeah,
way.
people don't realize that the massive solidarity that is seen on the United States left on Palestine is extremely unique. It's extremely unique, meaning that there are, and we did many streams displaying this, that there's a very large segment of the United States left that is filled with privileged academic suburbanites who are more attached to the empire. Now, these people, because the Zionist entity is so barbaric, they speak out against Palestine. These are social democrat-like types. They stand for Palestine, but they believe the empire regarding anything else. These are the same people who was advocating funding Ukraine. I promise you, those are the same people who was upset with you. The same people who advocated funding the Ukraine war. We talk, and if you want to know what I'm talking about, I'll give you a name: Mehdi Hassan. Imagine the Mehdi Hassan archetype. Mehdi Hassan he has Assad derangement syndrome. He wants nothing more than the United States to overthrow Assad in Syria. He also is a strong supporter of the Zelensky Banderite regime, strong supporter of the Ukraine war, but he speaks out on Palestine because it's an obvious issue. So I think there's been a lot of people who misunderstood the lines of solidarity that actually exist because of Palestine, because the genocide in Gaza was so easy to get correct. So whenever you actually tell the truth, especially about stuff like white feminism, you get the same treatment that I have gotten for the last 5 years: complete cancelization and blacklisting by the professional managerial class. Because I explain how white feminism is a plague. It's a scourge of humanity that has been used to justify. I'll pass right to you, but they used to justify the murder of black and brown people, black men, Palestinian men. They use it to justify our murder and falsely accuse us of rape while being silent on the issues of black and brown women. And I'm tired of being quiet about it. But now, Dr. Spiro, I know you want to chime in, so go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, I wrote a tweet recently about how you can't talk about race without talking about the intersection of class. And this is a perfect example, right? Because you've got the elite Muslims, the elite Arabs, the elite Black people with their proximity to power, their proximity to whiteness that affords them privileges and access, right? Like that's what they don't want to give up on. And that's what makes them buy into the narrative. Because if you don't buy into the narrative and promote the narrative, you don't get a seat at the table, right? And even though the seat at the table doesn't mean that your people are getting freed, it just means that you personally have a seat at this table for a certain amount of time for your personal benefit. And, you know, that's where like revolutionary types are so different, right? Like the rebels, the revolutionaries, because they don't care to have a seat at the table if it means their people are in the ditches and in the prisons and on the streets, right? Being impacted by all the struggles, the class struggle, the race struggle, right? The gender struggle, all of it. And that's why, you know, some of the people you mentioned, and there are many others who you will find strangely commenting on things that seem to be such a, you know, departing from truth and justice. The thing, like they'll jump bandwagons constantly, where they'll be pro-Palestine, but then they'll, you know, say all this shit that doesn't make sense. And I'm saying I'm actually genuinely baffled by my X feed at the moment, because I will see these people who for the last 1 year have been like, smash the system, you know, this and that. And now all of a sudden they're like rejoicing at the idea of colonial imperial powers taking down or getting involved in the Middle East, right? Like the truth is that Gaddafi could have been a terrible human being. Saddam Hussein could have been a terrible human, may well have been a terrible human being. Same as Assad. This is not a commentary on whether these people are good, bad, moral, have committed crimes, not committed crimes. My commentary is simply that we shouldn't be allowing Western powers who have a stake in the game, right, to be getting involved, because we know what that involvement does. We know that that involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan and all these places where they wanted to free our people and bring liberation to these places, that these places were pillaged and looted. And, you know, that's what baffles me, is that I've got so many people who are celebrating this moment without having the foresight based on history to see what this means for that region.
Mir, it's great what's happening in Syria, isn't it? It's great that the Syrian civil war has reignited. Not for Syrians, I'd imagine. Well, you know, Iran and Russia backed Assad, getting his arse handed to him. Up the rebels, huh? Oh, wow, so you support armed resistance against a notoriously brutal regime like Hamas? What? No, they're terrorists. The guys in Syria are rebels. CNN and BBC said so. You know, they're kind of like the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars. You know those rebels are effectively Al-Qaeda and ISIS, yeah? Like the Americans would back Al-Qaeda, mate. You're not a Putin puppet now these days, are you? Their leader, Al-Jilani, literally founded Al-Qaeda in Syria. Used to be deputy to the founding leader of ISIS. Probably went a bit crazy on a gap year, did he? Listen, mate, they couldn't be Al-Qaeda or ISIS. The US are over there fighting ISIS. Really? I think they're mostly there to control Syrian wheat and oil. I mean, Trump and others have said so. Oh, okay. So you're an Assad apologist? Absolutely not. You can hate Assad and also hate self-serving US interventionism. Well, someone's got to step in. But who asked them to? I mean, when are they going to finally stop meddling in the region? When has it ever worked? Run in Russia! Run in Russia! Run in Russia!